Can't I just be me? I've got to tell you, that was the plaintive cry of many of my earlier adult years. Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm Jo Rawbone, and I'm here to share a little nugget with you. And if you've not joined me before for one of my nuggets, then these are just short, impromptu little gifts I give you, whether they be pearls or nuggets of gold, however you want to think about them. And often they've come about as a result of something I've experienced, which is true in this case here. So welcome to this nugget. If you want to comment or ask questions, whichever platform you're joining from, then please do. I've got my team in the background who are going to be busy supporting me or holding me together, holding me up, holding me every which way you like. So if I forget to look for comments, I'm sure they'll kind of kick me under the table virtually, as it were. So this is just going to be short, impromptu. And I've got a few things that I really want to talk to you about, share with you, I suppose. And my plaintive cry about can't I just be me is something that plagued me from mid-20s onwards, I suppose. Until then, I didn't really have awareness that I wasn't being me, that there was any pressure on me to be anything other than who I was. You've possibly heard my stories before, in that I knew I was different as a kid, and I took that difference with me. And it wasn't until, I guess, my mid-20s and moving on into kind of adulthood then, that I then felt this pressure to be not me, to be somehow other than who I really am. And that created a whole heap of frustrations for me. And some of these frustrations you may recognize, and you'll have your own, in which case, again, feel free to pop them in the comments. I know that if you're watching and joining through YouTube, we're more likely to see your comments, but because we're live on a variety of platforms, some of the comments I may not get back to until after the live has finished. But let me share with you some of my frustrations. I ended up feeling like I was bending myself so far out of shape that I couldn't really figure out what shape I was supposed to be anymore. I felt a bit like a pretzel, where everything was somewhere, but not where it was comfortable, not where it should be. And what I was doing was bending myself out of shape in order to fit in. Now, I love this analogy of a jigsaw, in that if we think about who we are in a team at work, we're all jigsaw pieces. And what we often know is who we fit in next to and next, alongside, and where we fit in the whole workflow. But I began to feel a bit like, I suppose, the square peg in a round hole, or the rogue jigsaw piece from another puzzle that you're trying to kind of ram into place somehow. So that whole bending myself out of shape was incredibly unhelpful and unhealthy for me, and created a lot of frustrations. And then if I compounded that with the unhelpful feedback I was getting, that, well, if you want to get on in your career, you know what you want to do? You want to be more like John over there. John, who always goes, me, yeah, I can do that. Look at me, I'm great. And Jo didn't want to be like John. Jo wanted to be like Jo. And I remember early on in my learning and development career, actually, having a real interesting debate with a colleague of mine. We were talking about visibility. We were talking about it as part of an influencing skills program. And there was a particular model we used that actually talked about credibility and visibility as increasing how influential we were. And my argument was always, let me build my credibility, then I'm prepared to be visible. And he was like, no, be visible first and then worry about your credibility afterwards. Richard, that's who that was, massive extrovert, me introvert. And I thought, how interesting that we approach these things differently. And it's not that there's a right and a wrong, really. But what really didn't help was being given this unhelpful feedback that encouraged me to be even more pretzel-like, which, yeah, doesn't suit somebody of my frame. Then there were frustrations around seeing people promoted ahead of me, where I knew I was kind of somewhat better than them in terms of my experience, in terms of my professionalism, a whole host of things. And it irked me somewhat to see people praised for work that I'd done or ideas that I'd come up with that they'd claimed. I think we might have some comments, so let's see what kind of comments we've got coming in. Brad and August, thank you. Here from Once a Week Story from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you for joining me, Brad and August. It's always great to have you along. And High Tech Mother. Oh, Holding, thank you. It's great to have you with us from Asia as well. Thank you, High Tech Mother. Yeah, my mother almost erased who I was. It took decades. Yes, yes. Now, that's when frustration then leads on into other things. So thank you for sharing that. In terms of when that kind of frustration really builds up, let me just read this final comment. I was always me, but then I stopped being me. Long story. Yeah, understanding my introversion and other aspects. Yeah, and I'm going to come on to talk about that a little bit, because like you, Sebastian, I lost who I was. And partly it was because I actually got exhausted in the end, exhausted from the pretending, exhausted from the masking, exhausted from being inauthentic and not taking sufficient time to replenish. And what that led me to, and God bless Brené Brown for helping me understand this, was a sense of, shame in that I knew I was behaving in ways that weren't who I really was. And then guilt because I'd done that. She helped me understand the difference with shame, where I am a bad person, and guilt where I've done something bad. And that whole journey of masking and pretending took me to that point of feeling both shame and guilt. And let me tell you where that took me. That took me to kind of overwhelming sadness. I won't go as far as depression, because it wasn't as far as depression, but it was this deep rooted sense of sadness that I wasn't enough as who I really am, that I had to be something else. And that really knocked my confidence and really it kind of absolutely depleted me of any authentic energy I had. And that took quite a few years until I had that question. And I think it links back to something you were saying, Sebastian, in terms of, well, who am I anyway? And when I decided to start that exploration, well, actually, who am I? I realized that I'd got lost in a kind of a flurry of what everyone else expected of me. And lost because what I'd been doing was playing small rather than playing full out. Yeah, I think we got another comment around that. So let's see what we come up with here. August, yeah. Yeah, it's almost a form of bullying, yes, to force people. It is. And for me, that's what the extroversion bias does. And majority of the time, it is unconscious bias, but some people do know what they're doing. So yeah, it is a sense of bullying. Oh, Helen, thank you for joining us from France. Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Helen was a fabulous guest on the last episode of Dropping Pebbles in the Pond, which we're going to be talking more about because it's too good an episode not to talk more about. So thank you for joining us today, Helen. Yeah, so figuring out who I really am. And for me, there was something about really doing that important exploration so that what I could do was identify my true gifts. Yeah, there's another comment. I think toxic shame, incredibly powerful and disempowering. Yes, in dampening who we really are. Yeah, thank you, Helen. Toxic shame. And you know, previously I wouldn't necessarily have called myself full of shame about what was happening, because it wasn't as though anything kind of, you know, embarrassing necessarily had happened to me. But what I was ashamed of was the fact that I'd become something that I didn't want to be, that wasn't true to me. I think I missed a comment that August shared. So can you pop that back up, please? Yeah. I call it making sounds from an empty vessel. Yeah. Yeah, gosh, absolutely. I can feel that as I read that, August. So thank you. So my journey into kind of exploring this question of who am I really was a lot of self-exploration and also kind of some feedback from people who I trusted to give me an honest reflection of how I was perceived, who I'd become, so that I could start to see where the disconnection was, where the incongruence was. And what I really came to realize is that I'd lost any sense of self-worth. Now, that had always been slightly dodgy territory for me, fragile ground. I mean, you're talking to the woman who got married at 19, fearing that if she didn't, she'd be left on the shelf. That was a short-lived marriage. But actually, what it encouraged me to do was to really start to reconnect with my own sense of self-worth and feel that in my whole being, because that's what enabled me to then help others see who I really was, but more than that, the benefit of who I really was, rather than skulking away in a corner, hiding or continuing to mask. And it's through that I think we get to the next important point, which is about how we enable the extroverts amongst us to recognize and honor the real introvert in us. Because we're often used to being overlooked and undervalued. Certainly many of my clients who come to work with me, that's the thing that they consistently talk about, is their frustration level has built because there's this continual overlooked, undervalued that leaves them actually feeling worth less. But what I realized is that can only continue if I collude. And there is a great quote. I didn't have time to kind of look at it beforehand, but I think it's one of the great actresses who says something like, someone can only make you feel worthless or unworthy with your permission, something like that. So many of us do have great relationships with extroverts. I mean, we have Brad and August here. Brad, who I know is an introvert, August, who I know is an extrovert. But what they're really good at, yeah, I'm going to just have a look at that comment in a minute. What they're really good at is valuing the difference. Pop that one back up. I want to see that one again. Yeah, people speak for us and say Brad won't speak anyway. Yes, so we are robbed of our voice. It's kind of stolen from us in some way. It's a bit like, if you're with someone who's maybe in a wheelchair and people start saying things like, does he take sugar? Because I'm in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean I can't hear and speak and speak for myself, answer questions myself. So for me, and I've always been about, this is not about division, about introverts are great, extroverts are bad, kind of creating further division. There's enough division in the world. We don't need to create more. What we need to do is create inclusion. But what that does mean, in my experience, is helping extroverts understand and value those things that we bring to the party. But we can only do that, I think, whether it be a colleague, a boss, a life partner, whoever. We can only do that if we find our voice to claim our strengths and articulate them positively. And the reason I wanted, there's a big comment here. Let me just check this one out. So true, Joe. I always say beneath the layers of our experiences are the ways in which we're expected to be is the person we're truly meant to be. Yes, 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 Helen. We need to accept that this person hasn't been suffocated. They're just needing us in there. Needing us in the here and now to help them live into their authenticity. Absolutely, absolutely. And Helen, I so love and support the work you're doing around helping your clients do just that. There was another one I missed there from High Tech Mother, I think. Yeah, being shamed for being different, quieter, and needing my own way to recharge. Shut me down socially more than just my need to charge before I socialize. Yeah. And these are the consistent kind of messages that I'm hearing, which sadden me, absolutely sadden me. Helen is magical, still in love with that episode. I so agree with you. And Dropping Pebbles in the Pond is coming in a few weeks' time, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But if you haven't caught the episode with Helen about the majesty of quiet presence, do it now, because it is a magical episode, and Helen herself is magical. As soon as I knew I wanted to talk about that and had that name as the title, Helen was the only guest I could have for that. So we waited until we could get her. Laura, thank you for joining me, my lovely. So what Laura's saying is, the quote, thank you. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Perfect. Yes. Eleanor Roosevelt. Thank you. Yeah. And I firmly believe that, in that, if all we do is complain and go, it's not my fault, it's, pointing the finger elsewhere rather than taking responsibility for showing up, then we are colluding. We are giving people permission if all we do is sit back and feel sorry for ourselves, kind of somewhat victim mode. So I've gone on a little longer than I thought I might, but where I want to take this is really starting to think about, so as an introvert, what are your strengths? Why is it important to not only play to your strengths, but to be able to articulate them positively? Because it is time for us to step into our power, and actually really use those listening skills that we have, the focusing skills, the ability that we have to hold space for people. Because one of the real advantages is that, because, says she hasn't stopped talking all day, but because we don't have to talk all the time, we hold space for others, and we can hold silence. And very few people can hold silence with love and with care and with compassion in the way that I know Helen can. So the thing is, you see, we don't need to shout to be heard. We don't need to kind of hustle and be pushy to make an impact. What we need to do is find our true, authentic selves and lead from that place of authenticity. Because the world needs our calm approach. It needs our quiet power and our ability to really listen. So as a result, the next pebbles in the pond that we're going to be looking at is around playing to your introvert strengths. And I've got a very special guest lined up, a guest who is an introvert, who is flourishing. And remember, flourishing is not a destination. It's not, right, that's it, I've flourished, I've arrived. No, it's a journey. And we choose day by day, moment by moment even, whether to flourish or not. And the guest who's coming to join me to talk about playing to your introvert strengths is someone who has very clearly chosen to flourish. So I do hope you'll join me. I think there are a few more comments before I sign off. So, hey, Carly. Hey, my lovely. Long time no see. Thank you for joining us. Big hugs to you. Laura, so important to take responsibility. Yes, I'm a firm believer in that. Helen, bless you. Oh, you're welcome, Helen. I can't sing your praises highly enough, and I will continue to do so, as will the rest of my audience. I make more impact silently than the noisiest colleague in my company. Yes, and that is incredibly powerful, and I urge you to continue doing that. And if other introverts would recognize that actually there is so much power in the silence, then it will stop all of this nonsense chatter that just fills the airwaves, but has no real meaning, adds no real value at all. Love that about silence, Joe, holding it in love, kindness, and compassion. So true. Yeah, thank you. Well, there's a replay, of course, definitely of the Helen episode of the Majesty of Quiet Presence. And if you're watching this on replay, please do add your comments and questions. I'll go back through and watch, and team and I will make sure that actually we pick up any of the questions you've got. But remember to preferably go to YouTube to subscribe to the channel there, because we'll see more comments. We can respond in real time much easier, and you'll get notified when we're about to go live. So thank you for joining me for this little nugget. And I think this one was a platinum nugget. Actually, it wasn't gold, it was platinum. And you can always get in touch, of course, at Flourishing Introverts Media, and you'll be able to find us everywhere through that. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Dropping Pebbles in the Pond. Good night.